Hey, good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming today. We're in for a treat of a presentation. Welcome to the November session of Manuscript Mondays of the Manuscript Society. Manuscript Society was founded in 1948 as the National Society of Autograph Collectors. It includes not just collectors, but also manuscript curators, librarians, dealers, and auction houses. It originally included members from Canada and the United States and now has members throughout the world, including members in Asia, Australia, Europe, and South America. The mission of the Manuscript Society is to encourage the collection and preservation of manuscripts and documents, to stimulate and aid collectors in their various collecting specialties, and to facilitate the exchange of information and knowledge among collectors, scholars, dealers, and the general public. The Manuscript Society publishes a quarterly journal, Manuscripts, and the quarterly newsletter, the Manuscript Society News. The Society also has a scholarship program. The Richard Matz Research Grant will be available again this upcoming spring. So please make sure to check the website for news about this. And we also hold an annual meeting where we get to see different behind-the-scenes visits to manuscript curated repositories and museums in the United States and abroad. The 2025 meeting was held in New York City, and the 2026 meeting will be held in Boston from May 27th to May 31st next year. And this evening we have Dr. Deborah Parker, Professor of Italian Emerita at the University of Virginia. Her research and teaching focused on Italian and the visual and print cultures in the medieval and early modern eras. Her books include Commentary on Ideology, Dante and the Renaissance, published in 1992, Bronzino, Renaissance Painter as Poet, published in 2000, and Michelangelo and the Art of Letter Writing, published in 2001. Tonight, she's going to be talking about her most recent book, Becoming Belle da Costa Greene, a visionary librarian through her letters, which was published in 2024. Dr. Parker co-authored Belle Greene in Literature for the exhibition catalog for the Morgan Library exhibition, Belle da Costa Greene, A Librarian's Legacy. She has given talks on Belle da Costa Greene to the Rare Book School, Book Club of California, the Caston Club, and the Bonney Library. And information about the book has appeared in Humanities Watch, Fine Books and Collections, and the New Books Network. Her talk will explore Greene's relationship with members of the European book trade and the impact of her activities on the international market for rare books and manuscripts. So without further ado, we'll hear her presentation, which we pre-recorded ahead of time. And then afterwards, there'll be a Q&A, so come with some good questions and answers afterwards. So go ahead, Lee. We're ready for the presentation. Thanks, Dr. Parker. Appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you, everyone, for coming this evening. I'd like to thank Jay Gatemore and Lee Cathanas for their help in setting up this presentation. She wears her hair long and does not use glasses, runs to Europe on secret missions, and is the terror of continental collectors' agents. Her name is Belle Greene. She so reads a breezy account of Greene's escapades in Europe in an August 1912 Chicago Tribune article. 6 years after Pierpont Morgan had hired Greene, her exploits had become famous enough to warrant mention in the nation's newspapers. While this description displays the exaggeration frequently found in newspaper stories, then as now, the claims about Greene's movements are not unwarranted. The skills and strategies required to obtain prized manuscripts in an era when wealthy collectors vied for such rarities were considerable. Belle Greene possessed these abilities in abundance. She acquired her talents on the job. Much of the finesse she exercised when on the hunt can be traced to her pursuits in Europe. My talk today will examine Greene's activities during these trips and how her friendships with European specialists refined her ability to assess rare books and manuscripts. Let me begin with some notices about Greene's background. Born in 1879, Belle was the daughter of two light-skinned Black Americans, Genevieve Ida Fleet and Richard T. Greener. Her mother is the woman seated in the chair in the right photograph. Her father was the first Black man to graduate from Harvard, and he pursued a variety of careers: librarian, dean of Howard University, and U.S. consul in Vladivostok. When Greener and Fleet separated in 1898, Greene's mother decided to cross the color line. Fleet assumed a Dutch middle name, Van Vliet, changed the family's last name to Greene, and lived henceforth as white. Belle Marion Greener became Belle da Costa Greene, the Portuguese da Costa, providing a ready explanation for her olive complexion. From 1896 to 99, Greene attended an all-girls boarding school, the Northfield Seminary for Young Ladies in Massachusetts. She learned the basics of cataloging during a summer course on librarianship at Amherst College in July 1901. From 1902, so the photograph on the right shows Greene in the last row, and I've got a red box around Greene. This is the earliest known photograph of her. From 1902, she worked at Princeton's library, where she encountered Junius Morgan, Pierpont's nephew. Junius was also employed at Princeton, and he had donated his collection of rare manuscripts and early printed editions of Virgil to his alma mater. When Morgan sought a librarian in 1905, his nephew recommended Belle Greene. So on the right, we have a portrait of Belle Greene, and on the left, Edward Steichen's portrait of Morgan. Before her first trip abroad, Greene's library responsibilities consisted largely of cataloging, checking invoices, and fielding requests from dealers keen to interest Morgan in their wares. Greene made no acquisitions on her own before her first trip abroad. This lack of agency, however, was soon to change. From 1908 to 1936, Greene made 13 trips to Europe. Her pursuits were varied. She met with curators, museum directors, bibliographers, and restorers, visited museums, libraries, and archives, viewed private collections, hobnobbed with the English aristocracy, rendezvoused with her romantic partner, Bernard Berenson, and introduced her nephew, Robert Leveridge, to Europe, and relaxed at luxury resorts. Her transatlantic network was deep. A partial list, and that's all this slide shows, is a partial list of her professional associates would include Charles Hercules Reed, keeper of British and medieval antiquarian antiquities and ethnography, Alfred W. Pollard, keeper of printed books, and Sidney Coven, curator of prints, all at the British Museum, Joseph H. Fitzhenry, director of the South Kensington Museum, today's Victorian and Albert Museum, Sidney Cockrow, director of the Fitzwilliam, Achille Ratti, vice prefect of the Vatican Library, who later became Pius IX, art historians Roger Fry, Bernard Berenson, and Adolphe Goldschmidt, French bookbinder and dealer Léon Gruot, Vatican Library archivist Franz Earl, and many dealers, Bernard Quaritch, the Durlacher brothers, the Duveen brothers, and Jacques Seligman among them. She met Churchill at a tea and socialized with the English gentry. By any account, Belle Greene's European network was extensive. Greene went to England in the winter of 1908. to retrieve some of Morgan's purchases. The financier also seems to have given her permission to acquire books on her own initiative. The librarian's presence in London coincided with the auction of Lord Amherst's storied collection of rare books. The story of her purchase of 16 works, printed by William Caxton, has become part of the lore of Greene's extraordinary career. And here I have on the left an article in the New York Times about this purchase, as well as an image of a section of the Morgan Library and Museum's display. They had an exhibition on Greene over the past year. The story of her purchase of 16 works printed by William Caxton has become part of the lore of Greene's extraordinary career. On December 3rd, 1908, the New York Times published an article, Buyer of Caxton's Maybe J.P. Morgan, 16 rare volumes in the Great Amherst collection are privately sold. Greene revealed this information 4 years later in another New York Times article, Spending J.P. Morgan's Money for Rare Books. In the midst of an article about her work for Morgan, she reveals that she had offered Lord Amherst, quote, a goodly sum for all 16 volumes before the auction. Quote, you see, she effuses, I just had to have them. It wasn't just the generous amount proffered, which cinched the sale. Greene told Lord Amherst that if Morgan were to withdraw from the auction, the bids would be lower. However demurely recounted, the proffer of immediate payment was laced with a threat. This greatest coup, as Greene put it, described the transaction. Likely field dramatic newspaper accounts of her as the terror of continental agents, acting on her own in a new place, had unleashed new skills, an instinct for seizing the moment and the ability to make offers not to be refused. There's more to this first trip abroad. Shortly after purchasing the 16 Caxtons, Greene met Sidney Cockerell, director of the Fitzwilliam Museum and a highly esteemed authority on illuminated manuscripts. Cockerell recorded their encounter in his diary entry for December the 7th, 1908. Quote, a very nice, intelligent woman with a great enthusiasm for manuscripts. Earlier that day, he had escorted her to view manuscripts at the Fitzwilliam and other Cambridge libraries. This was the auspicious beginning of Belle Greene's friendship with Cockerell, someone who she came to regard as one of her, quote, staunchest supporters. And I shall return to their friendship a bit later in this talk. Roughly 1 month after meeting Sidney Cockerell in England, Greene met Bernard Berenson in New York in 1909. Berenson and his wife were in the U.S. to establish connections with American collectors. The librarian and connoisseur quickly became enamored of one another. Berenson became the love of her life, and Greene observes one biographer was, quote, the one romance in Berenson's life that would stand apart from all others in depth and intensity. Until the two reunited 17 months later in Europe, they sustained their relationship through letters. Over the course of 40 years, Greene wrote Berenson nearly 600 letters, spanning the period from February 1909 to March 1949. These letters comprise the largest archive of Greene's personal papers. Many describe her working life. Passage from 2 letters reveal Greene's reflections on her trip to England. In an April 1909 letter, she informs Berenson of her summer plans. Quote, I have started to study Italian, and I'm also about to take a course in bookbinding, which will doubtless seem absurd to you, but is very necessary that I understand thoroughly all about the making of my books as well as the interiors. Was it Greene's encounter with British rare book experts that prompted this interest in improving her skill sets? She mentions the British art collector and dealer Joseph H. Fitzhenry in the same letter. Fitz, she writes, Berenson, was so extraordinarily kind to me when I was in London and did things for me which I could never repay him if I had all the gifts of Valhalla at my behest. His letters are a liberal education to me. In another 1909 letter, she mentions that Alfred W. Pollard had visited Morgan's library. Quote, "We have had a nice visit from Mr. Pollard, the keeper of the printed books at the British Museum. He quite loved my library." Belle often referred to Morgan's library as my library, as her library. "It was a joy to have him because he is one of the few men who really knows about incunabula. If I can ever get away for several months, I'm going to study with him. Beloved, it frightens me when I stop long enough to think of how much I have to learn." These two admissions, written only a few months after her return, show how Greene's encounter with English experts such as Fitzhenry, Cockerill, and Pollard had prompted the recognition of gaps in her knowledge and, no less importantly, her determination to broaden her competencies. During her second trip to Europe in the summer of 1910, she did just that. While she met with many of the bookmen she had befriended in 1908, the primary purpose of this trip was to see Berenson. After meeting in London, the two traveled to Paris, then took the Orient Express to Munich before embarking on a tour of towns in Italy. In Munich, they saw a landmark exhibition, Masterpieces of Mohammedan Art. As Berenson described his wonderment over the objects displayed to his wife, Mary, "Overwhelming is the word. The quantity is immense, the quality very high or very interesting, and the arrangement a revelation of order, taste, and distinction." This exhibition would influence the future collecting interests of both Berenson and Greene, and then she, in turn, encouraged Morgan to purchase Islamic works. And I've included one Islamic work in the Morgan Library's collection on the right. During their travels, Berenson took notice of the quality of Greene's perceptions as they viewed works of art in churches and museums and described them to his wife, Mary. Quote, this is Berenson writing, Mary Berenson, "BG remains incredibly, miraculously responsive, and most of all to the things I really care most about." Such reports offer a glimpse into the Berensons' open marriage. On its own, Berenson's observations seem little more than a bland tribute to Greene's vitality. For Berenson, however, the notion of responsiveness lies at the heart of his approach towards art. Now, I'm quoting from a passage from one of his books. "We must look and look and look until we live the painting," he writes in the preface to Italian Painters of the Renaissance. In looking intently, the engaged viewer becomes responsive and expansive. During their travels through Italy, Greene would have had ample opportunity to observe Berenson's formidable capacity for looking, as well as to assimilate his expositions of the works they examined together. Greene's earliest known descriptions of literary or artistic works are marked by the vivacity of her responses. We need look no further than to the language of art employed in a letter describing her impressions of works in the Vatican collections, to see the art scholar's influence. Having viewed them on her own, she relays to Berenson, "Yesterday morning, I went to look at the Raphael stanze, which I must admit to loving in a mild, calm, cooing, gentle way." So on the left is the transcription, and on the right, a passage from this letter. "Then I went to the Pinacoteca and had a grand time. I sat down hard before the Forlì Sixtus IV and enjoyed it as I have only enjoyed things with you, the color, the dignity of the faces, and composition. Above all, the sense of space that you so love, filled me with joy. A Cuccio Gisi, Virgin and Child, which reminded me so much of the Persian things, and in composition, it was much like one of the paintings at the Munich exhibition, which you said was purely Chinese. And here are some reproductions of some of the works she describes. Raphael Stanze, Melozzo de Forlì's Sextus IV appointing the Vatican prefect, and then the Francescuccio Gisi Madonna of Humility, all in the Vatican museums. Summing up the wonder of their weeks together, she writes, quote, "Also, I shall never forget my wonderful month with you in Italy. It combined so many wonderful things, our real love, the wonderful things we saw, the enchanting motor trips, and all that you taught me and did for me. I can never nor wish ever to forget, and I shall always hold it in my memory." Berenson refined Greene's eye, but it was the librarian's quickness and discernment which enabled her to apply his methods to her own field of interest. While Berenson's relationship with the librarian was, of course, more than professional, he assisted her work in a number of ways, helping with attributions, teaching her how to spot forgeries, informing her of fine manuscripts for sale, sending her books on specialized topics, and writing articles about objects in Morgan's collections. And all these subjects are covered in her letters to him. This second trip abroad proved expansive in other ways. Upon returning to London, she purchased a beautifully illuminated Spanish manuscript of Beatus on the Apocalypse. And this is a detail from an illustration from that manuscript in the Morgan Library. She also reconnected with many of the curators she had befriended in 1908, Pollard, Coven, Reed, and Cockerill. The latter accompanied her to the Society of Antiquarians to examine some manuscripts, and to the British Museum to look at Chinese drawings and early Persian ceramics. We saw how Cockerill had praised Greene's great enthusiasm for manuscripts after their first meeting. This praise should not be underestimated. Sidney Cockerill regularly tested visitors and dismissed those whose, I'm quoting him, way of looking at books fell short of his expectations. As Greene had informed Berenson, Cockerill was, quote, one of her truest friends, the one who taught her the all too little she knows. Before he became director of the Fitzwilliam, Cockerill was the secretary of William Morris's Kelmscott Press and had assimilated many of the artist's criteria for evaluating manuscripts: attention to the price, condition, grandeur and beauty, quality of script, and the number of illustrations. And all such information he would have happily shared with Belle Greene. Greene's first two voyages abroad were formative. Their importance for the refinement of her eye and the honing of her expertise cannot be overestimated. Such discernment and acuity augmented her authority within the rare book world. She pursued her education as her work required, and in so doing, transformed herself and, one might add, the working spaces she occupied, and in many cases, dominated. Much was to change before Greene's next trip to Europe. Within 6 months of her return, Greene became a celebrity librarian after making another spectacular purchase. On April 24, 1911, she won the bid for a rare edition of Caxton's Le Morte d'Arthur at the auction of Robert Howe's storied collection of rare books. The high price for this volume, $42,500, made the headlines. And here's one example of Greene bidding for books. The high price for this volume, $42,500, made the headlines. Other newspaper stories quickly followed. And here's just an example from the Library of Congress page on newspaper articles devoted to Belle da Costa Greene. Other newspaper stories quickly followed. Between 1911 and 1915, 14 articles appeared in American newspapers, all highlighting the same points: Morgan's trust in his librarian, her expertise, her attractiveness, and her high salary. Little wonder that Greene mused to Berenson in January 1912, "I must grudgingly admit to being the most interesting person in New York, for that's all they talk about." 2 years later, her life was upended. Pierpont Morgan died in Rome on March 31st, 1913. "My heart and life are broken," she cabled Berenson. In the immediate aftermath, she dreamed of taking refuge in study, going so far as to ask Sidney Cockerell, quote, "If I can get away for a few months next year, will you take me as a pupil? When Morgan Jr. goes to London, I am going to give him a letter to you and ask him to go to see you in Cambridge. I want you to be friends. You will like him and he will like you, and just merely knowing you will teach him a lot." Distraught as Greene was, she had the presence of mind to sow the seeds for nourishing Jack Morgan's interest in the library by encouraging a friendship between her new boss and Cockerell. 9 days later, she wrote Berenson about her interest in living abroad and continuing her studies. Quote, "I'm going to head all my efforts to saving up enough money in the next 5 years so that I can quit and live abroad, if only on $4,000 a year. Then I will work and study and be happy." This dream, however, quickly receded as Greene turned to matters which required her immediate attention. Morgan left no indication for the future of his library in his will, aside from the wish that Greene be retained at her present salary. Pierpont Morgan Jr., more commonly known as Jack, proceeded to sell many of his father's collections to pay inheritance taxes. Greene's role in these undertakings was considerable and very little known. All of this information comes out in her letters to Berenson. Between 1913 and 15, she undertook an inventory of the library's 21,000 volumes and oversaw the selling of Morgan's collection of some 41,000 objects, among them a suite of Fragonard paintings, bronzes, Chinese porcelains, tapestries, enamels, maiolica, and 18th century furniture. Greene helped net roughly $12 million for these collections. All this work transformed Greene, her relation to Jack Morgan, and her new boss's views of the library. After dispensing with the sales of Morgan's collections, Greene's thoughts turned to acquisitions. While the outbreak of World War II in 1914 made travel abroad difficult, Greene went to England in the fall of 1916. This was her third trip abroad. The librarian's world of acquaintance now encompassed wealthy British collectors and aristocrats, among them newspaper proprietor and collector Henry Yates Thompson, merchant bank and collector Robert Benson, and Lord Carmichael, a trustee of the National Gallery. She wrote Berenson about her plans. "I'm going to see the Phillips collection at Cheltenham tomorrow with Yates Thompson. It will take the whole day. I dine with them on my return in the evening. If Fenwick can be persuaded to sell, I want to buy a few." Greene was on the hunt. Accompanied by Yates Thompson, one of England's foremost collectors of rare books and manuscripts, she arrived well poised to act. We turn now to one of Greene's most spectacular acquisitions, the 13th century Crusader Bible. And here are two illustrations from that work, one of the Morgan Libraries and Museum's prize collection. It was a facsimile was on display at the recent show on Belle Greene. Prized for its battle scenes and a fascinating provenance that includes Louis IX, the Bishop of Krakow, Shah Abbas, king of the Persians, and John Datanasi, a Greek purveyor of antiquities, the Crusader Bible is considered a masterpiece of French Gothic illumination. Greene may have first learned of Thomas Phillips, a voracious hoarder of manuscripts, after meeting Sidney Cockerill in December 1908. A self-confessed velomaniac, Phillips had amassed some 60,000 manuscripts. After returning to the US in 1908, Greene had prevailed upon Berenson to ask Count Paul Durieux, an expert on manuscript illumination, for his opinion of manuscripts in the possession of some man at Cheltenham. And I'll just read part of this letter, the part highlighted in blue. They belong to some man at Cheltenham, name not yet divulged. I understand that the Comte Durieux has seen the collection or part of it, and I am convinced that I can save lots of time if I can learn his opinion without, however, his learning of our interest or even knowledge that the collection is for sale. If you are in correspondence with Monsieur Durieux and could casually learn of his opinion of this collection, I would be truly grateful to you. The man at Cheltenham is Thomas Fitzroy Fenwick, Phillips's grandson. Upon displaying the manuscript to Greene and Yates Thompson, Fenwick declared its price was £10,000. In one version of what happened next, Greene replied, "I'll take it. You will receive a check," and walked out with the manuscript in her handbag. 2 days later, Greene informed Cockerill of what she had done and sought his advice. Cockerill himself had sought to acquire this manuscript many times. He coolly replied, "The manuscript you were clever enough to secure in Cheltenham is an incomparable treasure. I have long regarded it as the most covetable manuscript of the 13th century in private hands." In fact, the manuscript was not released until Fenwick informed Greene in December 1916 that the Court of Chancery had approved the sale. More important than any fictional elements in this story is what the purchase reveals about Greene's strategies when she was on the hunt. An adept use of back channels, secrecy, the exploitation of her network, a willingness to play the long game, and the seizure of opportunities when they presented themselves. Her European network, along with considerably expanded negotiating skills, served her well. Belle Greene had become a considerable force in the rare book world. Quote, "I am something of a power," she quipped to Berenson in 1919, and had acquired the reputation of being someone who could do anything. This is what one person seeking a favor from her had told her in his plea. In 1924, she was appointed the director of Morgan's Library. After Pierpont Morgan's death, she had dreamed of transforming the banker's library into, quote, "a big institution to see what I can do to make it a dernier resort for scholars in certain fields, to make our material available to them, and to make them welcome." While this ambition was accomplished stateside, Greene made regular trips to Europe. Between 1921 to 1936, she visited Europe 10 times. She indulged in favorite pastimes, viewing manuscripts with Sidney Cockerill, and undertook activities commensurate with her new role. During her 5th trip in the summer of 1925, she visited the paleography Henri Auguste Aumont at the Bibliothèque Nationale. "I spoke to him about getting out a new edition of his Greek manuscripts," she writes Berenson, "and he said that he had been gathering material for it for many years, but that the publisher was afraid, in fact would not undertake it, as it involved such an expenditure of plates, types, etc. So I told him that we would underwrite it. And do you know, BB, then when he finally understood what I intended to do, the tears just ran down his face." The librarian director was now a patron of other librarians. This generous gift to Aumont had clearly been preceded by earlier acts of generosity. The French government bestowed upon Greene the Palme de l'Instruction Publique in 1921. There's an image of the award. An award given to foreigners who had contributed generously to the expansion of French culture in the world. We are a long way from the Belle Greene of 1908, who worried about how much she had to learn. In addition to taking on the role of cultural patron, Greene became an external consultant to other institutions. One of the little-known facts about Greene's accomplishments is her role in the formation of Villa Itati, Harvard's Center for Italian Renaissance Studies in Florence. Beginning in July 1924, Greene begins offering advice on the disposition of Itati, clearly in reply to a request from Berenson. She suggested that he approach John D. Rockefeller to provide the endowment, consider bequeathing the art collection to Harvard's Fogg Museum, avoid any alignment with the American Academy in Rome or the National Gallery in Washington, and that he enlist the support of Edward Forbes, director of the Fogg, and Associate Director Paul Sachs in raising the endowment. She urged Berenson, quote, to do it now, adding that it would be, quote, a mistake to leave things in the air. Grand actions are to be undertaken when one is in the best possible of all healths. While she remained ever alert to acquiring worthy additions to her library, Greene's travels to Europe in the 1920s and 1930s became more expansive. She spent time in the Dolomites in 1925, took walks in the mountains of Switzerland in July 1926, and rested at a luxury resort, La Baule, in Brittany in 1934. Assuming the role of a beneficent worldly aunt, she took her nephew Bobby on 6 of the trips. During a sojourn at the Grand Hotel in Venice in 1926, she made frequent visits to 2 sites, Santa Maria dei Miracoli, where she sat almost without looking for at least 15 minutes every day, and to San Lazzaro, an Armenian monastery located on a small island. That church, she writes Berenson, seeps enough quiet beauty into my body to keep me on my feet for all the chores I must do. All the fathers at the San Lazzaro and I are as one. They chatter about as the birds did for St. Francis. The primary goal during Greene's final European excursions was sensory enrichment and fulfillment. During these trips, she realized her early dream of taking in favorite sights at leisure, ever alert to what enthralled her. In commenting on the English wall paintings, manuscripts, and architecture she studied in 1935, she informed Berenson, quote, we have seen something of all these, and I hope that I now have them fixed in my eye and mind forever. From her first to her last trips to Europe, Belle Greene pursued a sensuous education. This phrase is taken from Henry James, who used it to describe the sensuous education his father sought to give his adolescent sons in A Small Boy and Others, a 1913 childhood autobiography. Henry James Sr. sought to cultivate the free play of the mind in his sons, to nourish the quote, visiting mind. Such a program befits Belle Greene's ambitions in her travels to Europe. If Henry James Sr. wanted his sons to be rather than do, Belle Greene, in cultivating her sensibilities and imagination, did both. Thank you.
Thank you. This was wonderful. Thank you so much. Jay, I'm going to make sure you're unmuted too. You should be able to speak now too, correct? We'll get your video back on.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Parker. That was wonderful. Thank you very much for doing that for us. I'll ask a couple questions in the beginning, and then if you have questions, please put it in the Q&A or chat. If you want to ask your question in person, that's fine. Just raise your hand, and I will call on you and announce your name. When you are asking a question, I'll ask it for you, but I'll mention your name. But thank you very much, Dr. Parker. That was wonderful.
There you go.
My first question for you is, what inspired you to write about Belle da Costa Greene?
Well, I knew I had read one biography by Heidi Ardizzone, An Illuminated Life, Belle da Costa Greene's journey from prejudice to privilege, a while back. And then in 2021, I was a visiting fellow at Itati, and the director, Alina Payne, asked me to be filmed for a masterclass, and that involved selecting something unfamiliar to most visitors at Itati. And since Berenson was very interested in Dante, and that Dante is one of my specialties, I thought I would look at rare editions of Dante that Berenson had collected. And I wrote a script, I showed it to Alina Payne, and then she said, can you do a little bit more on Berenson's interest in the Vita Nuova and earlier work? And because I had mentioned to Alina that Berenson and Belle Greene considered the Vita Nuova a kind of so if there was a book of love for the two of them in the early stages of their romance, that was it. And when she mentioned that the Morgan was putting on an exhibition in 2023, 24. And so at that point, once I started reading the letters, and once I started, I really just couldn't stop. And I wrote a short piece on the importance of the Vita Nuova for the two of them, and then decided that there was a lot of material in the letters, and that I could approach them in a way that was different than biographers who are seeking more for just data to assemble sort of the chronology of her life, but they weren't that interested in her voice.
Now, where are these letters between Greene and Berenson located?
Well, the originals are at Villa Itati, Harvard Center for Italian Renaissance Studies. But recently, actually at the end of last year, the Morgan exhibition opened around October 5th, I believe. And on the same day the exhibition opened, they launched a website, a collaboration between Itati and the Morgan Library entitled Belle da Costa Greene's Letters to Bernard Berenson. And if anyone is interested in looking at those letters, they're available to everyone. They've transcribed the letters because handwriting is really not that easy to read. Identified persons mentioned in the letters, and it's a great resource. And if anyone is interested in hearing in sort of reading Belle's responses to her work, to the really rich world in which she lived, there's nothing like looking at how she conveys that in her own very lively style.
One other question that I have is that, do you think that J. Pierpont Morgan or Bernard Berenson knew or suspected that Belle da Costa Greene was a woman of color?
That's one of the unanswerable questions out there. Gene Strauss, author of the big biography of Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan, American Financier, has said both in that book and more recently that if Morgan knew, there is no trace of that knowledge. Berenson certainly suspected, And well, in the summer they spent together, and likely subsequently asked questions about who her parents may have been, but there's no evidence that she ever disclosed this information. And one needs to keep in mind, too, that had she admitted anything to Berenson, it would have meant the end of her job, but it would have also put others at risk, and that is her sisters, her brother. Once her mother had decided to cross the color line, Belle, all her sisters and her brother, they all passed for white. And one of the sisters had children, so all of their lives would have been, their identities would have been at risk. And while Berenson suspected and would have queried her about her background, there's no evidence that she disclosed anything. And there's one that I want to bring up, two details that, at least in my mind, suggests that she never confirmed anything. One of the most fascinating letters was written in the spring of 1921. And she visited the Lincoln Memorial in Washington and wrote Berenson about her experience. And she said, "Something happened to me there." And she said that he is the only person to whom she could diverge this something. And then she adds, "and only whispering it in your ear in a halting voice." At the end of the letter, again, very interestingly, she writes the letter in one script, her library script, and at the end she writes, "Your somewhat changed Belle." And I went to visit. I had visited the Lincoln Memorial before, but I went back and I watched all the people walking through, and everyone is moved, as Belle would have been, by the huge wall inscriptions from the Gettysburg Address and the second inaugural speech. So maybe she is suggesting she might have told him something. But the other bit of information I want to mention is that 4 years after Belle died in 1950, Berenson he was in correspondence with a couple of her friends, and one of them was the landscape architect Ruth Nichols. And Berenson asked Ruth Nichols, did she say, so this is 4 years after her death, did she say anything about who her father was and why she burned my letters? And Nichols said she didn't answer those questions, but she did say how much she had learned from him. So
Wonderful.
I think it's highly unlikely that she ever affirmed anything while he had suspicions.
I see. Jay, do you see the questions and the Q&As up there, or would you like me to read them?
There's a couple in the chat that got asked first, Brian.
Okay,
so
yeah.
Let me get those.
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't know you had access to those. I want to make sure you got them. Yeah, it was Harrison Ellens, and then Brad had one on the Q&A, but the chat came first, for sure.
Harrison Wick, he's a special collections librarian at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. He asks, he's conducting research into the provenance of four-edge paintings. Do you know if she collected any four-edge painting books?
I don't know what four-edge paintings or four-edge painting books are, but I can say that I've never seen any reference to them, but that doesn't mean that maybe in the correspondence in the Morgan Library, but there might not be some reference.
Yeah, these are the books where if you fan the foredge, painting appears. But a question from Ellen Clark, and I think you might have answered this already, but Berenson's side of their correspondence does not survive. Is that correct?
Sadly, no. She burned a good deal of her personal, or she had destroyed many of her personal papers before her death.
A question from Brad Cook. He's the editor of the Manuscripts and also the photographic archivist at Indiana University. He asks, at some point, Greene stopped talking to her father. What was the reason for this?
Well, so Richard T. Greener and Genevieve Ida Fleet separated, I think it was around 1898. And shortly after Genevieve decided to cross the color line, there is no surviving evidence that shows that Greene had any contact with her father or her uncles. But Heidi Ardizzoni, the biographer, has wondered if, and there's a letter to Berenson in January 1914, around then, anyhow, that indicates that she had gone to Chicago to see someone very dear to her and from her past. He had wondered if it might be some lover or something. At any rate, Ardizzone suspects that there was a reunion with Greener at that point, but it's a hypothesis. I think it's a credible one.
Yeah. I think that was covered in the novelized version of Belle's life that talks about it goes into more detail of obviously fictionalized version of the relationship with Berenson and her father.
Yes, very fictionalized.
Yes, the personal librarian, I believe it is.
Yes, and then there's another one written 1 year later that was originally in French, entitled Belle Greene by Alexandre Lapierre. But it's funny because it was Lapierre's fictional biography was written in French, and then it was translated into English. But at the very beginning, she makes she claims that much of this is documented, everything, but the voice isn't Belle Greene's because it's been translated from French, and some of the renditions in English aren't that close to. They just don't have the liveliness of Belle Greene's own words.
A question with somebody from, not more of a statement. The question's about the novel from somebody with the initials RA. In the novel, her father went to Russia and had another wife and family. Did that happen in real life?
Yes. He lived with a Japanese woman for several years, and she had children by him.
And is there any other repositories in the United States or elsewhere that has letters of Belle?
Yes, they would be business correspondence. A friend of mine, Kendon Stubbs, who was the associate librarian at the University of Virginia, told me that there was one actually in the rare book library at the University of Virginia, and there would be there's letters to dealers. Quaritch has some letters. Professional correspondence would be scattered in various archives and libraries.
And she never married or had children, but did her siblings?
One sister, Theodora, married. Her first husband died in World War I, and she remarried. The son from the first marriage, Belle adopted him. That's Robert Leverage, known as Bobby. And then Theodora had later children with her second husband. And one very moving event that took place, I was invited to the opening of the Morgans show. And some of the later members of Theodora's family were at the opening as well.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Do you want to mention how to buy your book, Deborah?
That's a great question, Jay.
I recommend it. It's an excellent book. You received an award from the Library of Virginia for that as well. So
yeah, it can be purchased on Amazon and from Harvard University Press as well. It was printed by one of Itati's own imprints, but it's distributed by Harvard University Press because Itati belongs to Harvard. And I think you can probably get it at Barnes and Noble and other big name outlets.
Yeah. Any other questions for Dr. Parker? Well, Dr. Parker, thank you very much. Thank you very much again for the excellent presentation. We really enjoyed it. It will be made available online. The presentation will be, not the Q&A, but at some point in the next couple of days, it'll be added to the Manuscript Society website, at which point I'll send you the link. But for those who weren't able to attend, if you know others that weren't able to attend, you can share. And the next session in December of the Manuscript Society will be membership only. So the open mic night for sharing news about collecting and so forth. So stay tuned for more information about that. But thanks again, Dr. Parker. I really appreciate the time you took to do this and sharing more about Belle da Costa Greene, who's a very interesting figure in our profession and our world. And it's great to know more about your research and in your book.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you everyone for attending the presentation tonight.